"Do not cry, sister," her eldest brother whispered as he pressed the family seal into hot crimson wax. "This is the only way our house survives." The words echoed through the silent hall long after no one dared speak again. Evelyn Ashford stood beneath the silver banners of a family that had once ruled with honor, her trembling fingers folded neatly before her despite the storm gathering inside her heart. Outside, cold rain swept across the castle windows, blurring the towering pines that surrounded the Ashford estate until the world beyond looked like a fading dream. She had grown up believing those forests protected her. Tonight, they marked the road that would carry her away forever. No one asked whether she agreed. No one looked into her pale blue eyes to see the fear she fought so desperately to hide. Her two older brothers spoke only of duty, survival, treaties, and debts. Their voices sounded calm, almost rehearsed, as though they had repeated this conversation many times before she entered the room. The neighboring kingdom of Blackthorn had demanded peace after years of bitter rivalry between the packs. Gold would never be enough. Land would never satisfy them. Instead, the agreement required a noble daughter of House Ashford to live within the enemy king's territory as a symbol that the war had truly ended. Evelyn lowered her gaze, refusing to let tears become another victory for those who had already decided her future. She had spent her entire life trying to prove she was more than a quiet noblewoman whose gentle nature made others mistake kindness for weakness. She studied ancient histories while her brothers trained with swords. She learned healing herbs while they learned battle strategies. She remembered every servant's birthday, every stable hand's favorite story, every frightened child who smiled after she offered a warm blanket or comforting words. Yet none of those things carried value in a hall where strength was measured by power alone. One brother finally crossed the room and placed a folded gray traveling cloak over her shoulders. His hands hesitated for only a heartbeat before pulling away. "The Alpha King is said to be merciless," someone whispered near the doorway. Another servant quietly answered, "Pray the stories are exaggerated." Evelyn heard every word, but she lifted her chin with quiet dignity. If fear was waiting beyond those gates, she would meet it standing. The great castle doors slowly opened, allowing the scent of rain, pine, and distant thunder to spill inside. A black carriage waited beyond the stone steps, its polished surface reflecting the flickering torchlight like dark glass. For massive black horses stood perfectly still, their silver harnesses gleaming beneath the storm clouds. Soldiers wearing the crest of Blackthorn never once looked toward her with cruelty or triumph. Their expressions remained unreadable, as though they had been entrusted with something far more important than a prisoner. As Evelyn stepped toward the carriage, she glanced back only once. The banners of House Ashford fluttered above the towers, but no one called her name. No one asked her to stay. Far beyond the rain, beyond the endless forests separating two rival kingdoms, Alpha King Adrian Blackthorn suddenly opened his eyes from another restless dream. Once again he had seen the same young woman standing beneath falling silver snow, reaching toward him with sorrowful eyes he had searched for his entire life. The carriage rolled through the endless black pine forest beneath a sky heavy with silver clouds, its iron wheels humming softly over the ancient stone road that divided two kingdoms which had spent generations fearing one another. Evelyn Ashford sat quietly beside the narrow window, her hands folded over the gray cloak that still carried the faint scent of cedar from her childhood home. Every mile placed another invisible wall between the life she had known and the uncertain future waiting ahead. She expected resentment from the soldiers escorting her, yet none offered cruel words or mocking glances. They rode with disciplined silence, exchanging only brief signals whenever the road curved through dense woods or crossed narrow rivers where morning mist floated above the water like pale spirits. The strange courtesy unsettled her even more than open hostility would have. As the hours passed, rain gave way to gentle sunlight filtering through towering evergreens, painting moving patterns across the carriage floor. Evelyn closed her eyes for only a moment, allowing the rhythm of the journey to quiet the ache in her chest. She remembered her late mother's voice telling her that even the darkest forest eventually opened toward the light, although the traveler could rarely see it while standing beneath the trees. The memory warmed her heart until the carriage suddenly slowed. Curious, She carefully lifted the curtain. Ahead stood an enormous stone bridge stretching across a deep canyon where a silver river rushed nearly 100 feet below. Massive wolf statues guarded both sides of the crossing, their weathered faces lifted toward the sky as though protecting everyone who entered Blackthorn territory. The captain riding beside the carriage removed his helmet and spoke with unexpected respect. "Welcome to Blackthorn lands, Lady Ashford. From this point forward, you are under the direct protection of His Majesty." Evelyn blinked in surprise. Protection was the last word she expected to hear. Before she could respond, the procession continued across the bridge, and for the first time she saw the kingdom that had existed only in frightening stories. Instead of burned villages or frightened people, peaceful farms stretched across rolling hills. Children chased one another through fields of lavender, while merchants arranged colorful fabrics beneath wooden market stalls. Elderly couples walked slowly along flower-lined streets without fear. The quiet life unfolding before her eyes looked nothing like the ruthless kingdom she had imagined. More than once, villagers noticed the royal carriage and respectfully lowered their heads. None threw stones. None shouted insults. Their expressions carried simple curiosity mixed with quiet hope, as though everyone had been waiting for something they could not explain. High above the valley, Blackthorn's citadel finally appeared, rising from the mountainside like part of the living rock itself. Dark towers reached toward the clouds, while silver banners fluttered proudly from every wall. It was magnificent rather than terrifying, ancient rather than cruel. Evelyn found herself staring in silent wonder until the carriage entered the enormous front courtyard where rows of royal guards stood perfectly still beneath polished armor. At that same moment, inside the highest tower overlooking the kingdom, King Adrian Blackthorn stood before an open window, unable to shake the strange certainty that the woman from his dreams had crossed the bridge into his world. For years he had awakened with only fading memories of silver eyes and quiet courage. Today, for the first time, the dream had not disappeared with the sunrise. Instead, it felt closer than his next breath. The towering gates of Blackthorn's citadel opened without a sound, revealing a courtyard paved with polished black stone that reflected the afternoon light like a still lake. Evelyn stepped carefully from the carriage, smoothing the wrinkles from her silver traveling dress before lifting her chin with quiet dignity. Dozens of royal guards stood in perfect formation, yet not one pair of eyes lingered on her with ridicule. Their discipline was absolute, their silence almost sacred. The captain who had escorted her placed one hand across his chest in respectful salute before speaking softly. "Lady Ashford, His Majesty is attending the royal council. You will be escorted to the eastern residence until he summons you." Evelyn nodded without speaking. She had prepared herself for chains, harsh commands, or endless suspicion. Instead, she was greeted with calm voices and measured courtesy, leaving her uncertain, which was more unsettling. A young noblewoman dressed in deep blue approached with graceful confidence. Her golden hair was gathered beneath an elegant silver circlet, and kindness softened her bright green eyes. "Welcome," she said warmly. "My name is Lady Margaret Hawthorne. I oversee the royal household. Please allow me to show you your chambers." Evelyn hesitated before following her through vast marble corridors illuminated by enormous crystal chandeliers. Every hallway displayed centuries of history carved into stone. Noble kings, queens, warriors, healers, and children appeared together in detailed reliefs, each face carrying quiet pride instead of conquest. Fresh flowers rested beneath tall windows overlooking gardens filled with white roses and silver fountains. The palace felt less like the fortress of an enemy and more like the home of an ancient kingdom that had survived countless winters without forgetting beauty. As they climbed a wide staircase, Evelyn finally found the courage to ask the question that had lingered in her thoughts since crossing the border. "Why has everyone treated me with such kindness?" Lady Margaret slowed her steps before offering a gentle smile. "Because His Majesty gave very clear orders before your arrival." Evelyn looked at her in surprise. "What orders?" Lady Margaret answered without hesitation. "That no one was to speak disrespectfully to you, frighten you, or remind you that you arrived here through a political agreement. He instructed every servant and every knight that you were to be treated with the honor due to a royal guest." Evelyn stopped walking for a heartbeat. Nothing about the stories she had heard matched those words. The Alpha King she had imagined was cold beyond reason. Yet someone who cared enough to protect the dignity of a stranger could not be entirely without compassion. Lady Margaret quietly opened the doors to a spacious chamber where sunlight poured across polished wooden floors. Shelves filled with books lined one wall. A fireplace glowed softly despite the cool afternoon air. Fresh lavender rested beside the window, filling the room with a comforting fragrance that reminded Evelyn of peaceful summers long ago. Folded gowns in silver, ivory, and soft blue had already been prepared inside an elegant wardrobe. She stared in disbelief. These cannot possibly be for me. Lady Margaret smiled again. His Majesty personally selected the colors after consulting the royal seamstress. He said they would suit someone with gentle eyes. Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken. She had never met the Alpha King. He had never seen her face. How could he possibly know what colors suited her? Far above the eastern residence, Adrian remained inside the council chamber while advisors discussed treaties, borders, and harvest reports. But their voices faded into distant echoes. His attention drifted toward the window where the afternoon breeze carried the faintest unfamiliar scent through the open stone arches. It was delicate, like fresh snow settling over cedar branches. His heart recognized it instantly. The woman who had walked beside him in countless dreams was finally beneath the same roof, and for the first time in his life, destiny no longer felt like a distant promise. It had become wonderfully, impossibly real. Evenings settled gently over Blackthorn Citadel, wrapping the towering walls in cool shades of blue and silver as hundreds of lanterns awakened one by one across the palace grounds. From the tall windows of her chamber, Evelyn watched servants stroll through the royal gardens carrying woven baskets filled with fresh flowers while musicians tuned quiet string instruments beneath a marble pavilion. Nothing about the scene resembled the fearful stories she had heard as a child. The kingdom beyond her window breathed with quiet confidence instead of intimidation, and the people moved with the peaceful rhythm of a place that trusted its ruler. Lady Margaret soon returned carrying a simple silver gown embroidered with delicate moonflowers along the sleeves. His Majesty has requested your presence at the evening banquet, she explained with a reassuring smile. There is no cause for concern. It is a welcoming dinner attended only by members of the royal household. Evelyn hesitated as she accepted the gown. Will I finally meet the Alpha King? Lady Margaret nodded softly. If the council concludes before sunset, yes. A flutter of nervous anticipation stirred within Evelyn as she changed into the elegant dress. The soft fabric rested lightly against her skin, and for the first time since leaving her home, she caught a glimpse of herself in the tall mirror and almost recognized the confident young woman staring back. Her silver hair flowed neatly over one shoulder, and the gown reflected the warm candlelight with a quiet elegance that reminded her of moonlight on fresh snow. She silently thanked the attendants before following Lady Margaret through a series of grand corridors toward the royal dining hall. Along the way they passed portraits of generations of Blackthorn rulers. Some appeared stern, others thoughtful, but one portrait immediately captured Evelyn's attention. It showed a much younger Adrian standing beneath winter skies with unmistakable silver eyes fixed toward a distant horizon. Even painted in oils, there was a quiet loneliness hidden beneath his calm expression. Evelyn slowed her steps. He looks sad. Lady Margaret glanced at the portrait before answering gently. His Majesty has carried responsibilities since he was very young. Many people see his strength. Few notice the weight he has carried alone. Before Evelyn could ask another question, the enormous doors to the banquet hall opened. Warm golden light spilled across polished marble as nobles and advisors gathered around a long oak table decorated with white roses, silver candles, and crystal glasses that shimmered beneath towering chandeliers. Conversations gradually softened as every guest noticed Evelyn entering beside Lady Margaret. She instinctively lowered her eyes, expecting whispers or judgment, yet the room greeted her with respectful silence. Several nobles even offered courteous bows as she passed. Confused but grateful, she took the seat prepared for her near the center of the table. One chair at the far end remained empty, larger than the others and carved with the crest of the royal wolf. Evelyn could almost feel its quiet presence waiting. At that same moment, the great hall doors opened once more. Every noble rose without a single command. Boots echoed steadily across the polished floor with measured confidence rather than intimidation. Evelyn slowly lifted her gaze. King Adrian Blackthorne entered wearing a tailored black coat trimmed with silver embroidery, his dark hair resting neatly against his shoulders, his posture calm and composed. The moment his silver eyes found hers across the length of the hall, time itself seemed to hesitate. He did not continue walking immediately. His expression remained composed, yet something warm flickered beneath his calm restraint, like a traveler who had finally reached the destination he had searched for through countless seasons. Evelyn felt an unfamiliar stillness settle over her heart, as though some invisible thread had quietly drawn two distant lives together long before either of them understood why. The silence that settled over the banquet hall was not born from fear, but from quiet anticipation as King Adrian Blackthorne crossed the polished marble floor with calm, deliberate steps. Every noble remained standing until he reached the head of the table, yet his attention never wandered from Evelyn. She felt the weight of his silver eyes without sensing judgment. Instead, there was an unmistakable familiarity that made her heartbeat quicken for reasons she could not explain. Adrian finally stopped beside his chair, but did not sit immediately. For several long seconds, he simply looked at her, almost as though he feared that one careless movement might cause her to disappear like morning mist. The room remained perfectly still until he offered the faintest smile, one so small that only those closest to him noticed. Lady Margaret lowered her eyes with quiet relief because she had never seen her king greet anyone that way before. Adrian placed one hand across his chest in a respectful gesture. "Lady Evelyn Ashford," he said, his deep voice calm and steady. "Welcome to Blackthorn Citadel. I hope your journey was comfortable." The simple kindness in his greeting surprised everyone present. Evelyn rose gracefully from her chair and answered with equal respect. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Your people have shown me nothing but generosity." Adrian inclined his head. "I am pleased to hear it. That was my wish." The words sounded ordinary, yet several royal advisors exchanged subtle glances. Their king rarely explained his intentions to anyone. Tonight he had done so without hesitation. As the guests resumed their seats, servants quietly served warm bread, roasted vegetables, fresh berries, fragrant soup, and herbal tea gathered from the mountain gardens. Gentle conversation slowly returned throughout the hall, but Adrian remained unusually attentive whenever Evelyn spoke with Lady Margaret or thanked the servants. He noticed the way she smiled before accepting anything offered to her. He noticed that she always waited until everyone else had been served before lifting her own spoon. He noticed that every frightened young servant who accidentally met her eyes immediately relaxed after receiving her gentle smile. They were tiny moments that no one else considered important, yet each one matched another fragment of the dreams that had followed him since childhood. In those dreams, the mysterious young woman had always carried quiet kindness wherever she walked. Across the table, Evelyn gradually found herself studying the king as well. The feared ruler described in countless stories did not speak loudly or demand attention. Instead, he listened carefully whenever others addressed him. He thanked the elderly steward who recommended a new harvest schedule. He complimented the palace baker on the evening meal. He even paused to ask a young messenger whether his injured ankle had fully healed after last month's accident. Every answer revealed another side of the man hidden behind endless rumors. As dessert was served, an elderly council member leaned toward Adrian with a thoughtful expression. "Your Majesty, would you like us to arrange accommodations in the royal guest wing for Lady Ashford until the treaty is finalized?" Before anyone else could respond, Adrian answered with complete certainty. "Lady Evelyn is not a bargaining piece, nor is she a reminder of old conflicts. While she remains within Blackthorn, she will be treated as an honored member of this household." The statement settled gently over the room like fresh snowfall. Evelyn looked toward him in quiet surprise, unable to understand why a king who had never met her before today would defend her dignity so naturally. Adrian met her gaze once more, and for the briefest moment another forgotten dream flashed across his memory. He saw the same silver eyes standing beneath falling snow as a soft voice whispered, "I finally found you." When the vision faded, he realized with quiet certainty that destiny had not brought a stranger into his kingdom. It had returned someone his heart had somehow recognized long before his eyes ever could. When the evening banquet finally came to a close, guests slowly departed beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, their quiet conversations fading into the vast stone corridors of Blackthorn Citadel. Evelyn remained seated for a moment, gathering her thoughts before rising gracefully from her chair. She expected a servant to guide her back to the eastern residence, but before anyone stepped forward, Adrian descended from the head of the table and stopped several feet away. His posture remained respectful, his expression calm. "If you are not too tired," he said gently, "there is a place within the palace that I believe you may enjoy seeing." Evelyn looked toward Lady Margaret, who answered with an encouraging smile. "The Royal Moon Garden is beautiful this time of year." Evelyn nodded softly. "I would be honored, Your Majesty." Together they walked through quiet hallways where candlelight danced across polished marble and stained glass reflected shades of sapphire and silver onto the floor. Neither of them hurried. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward, as though both were listening to thoughts they could not yet explain. When they stepped outside, cool mountain air greeted them with the scent of pine and blooming jasmine. The Royal Moon Garden stretched across several acres, filled with white roses, silver lilies, crystal fountains, and ancient trees whose branches shimmered beneath the rising moon. Soft lanterns lined every pathway, creating pools of golden light among the flowers. Evelyn stopped near a fountain where water flowed gently over smooth stone carved into the shape of two wolves standing beneath a crescent moon. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Adrian watched her instead of the garden. "It has never looked quite like this before." She smiled politely, assuming he meant the changing seasons, but Adrian knew the truth. Every dream he had carried since childhood had taken place beneath silver flowers and moonlight that looked almost exactly like this garden. The only difference was that the woman from those dreams had always remained just beyond his reach. Tonight she stood only a few feet away. They continued walking until Evelyn noticed a narrow stone archway covered with climbing white vines. Beyond it stood an ancient oak tree unlike any she had ever seen. Its massive branches spread across nearly 60 feet, and tiny silver leaves shimmered even though no wind stirred them. "What tree is that?" she asked quietly. Adrian's gaze softened. "Our oldest legend calls it the Moonkeeper Oak. The first king planted it nearly 1,000 years ago. It is said the tree remembers promises that people forget." Evelyn stepped closer, resting her fingertips lightly against the cool bark. The instant her hand touched the ancient tree, a single silver leaf drifted gently downward before landing beside her feet. Adrian froze. Throughout his entire life, not once had the Moonkeeper Oak released a leaf without the arrival of the first snowfall. Yet tonight, beneath a perfectly clear sky, another silver leaf floated quietly to the ground, followed by another. Evelyn looked upward in surprise. "Is this normal?" she asked. Adrian slowly shook his head, unable to hide the quiet wonder in his silver eyes. Before he could answer, an elderly groundskeeper emerged from a nearby pathway carrying a lantern. The old man stopped the moment he noticed the falling leaves. His weathered face filled with astonishment before he bowed deeply. "Your Majesty," he whispered with emotion trembling in his voice, "I have tended this sacred garden for over 50 years. I have never seen the Moonkeeper Oak greet anyone this way." Evelyn looked from the old gardener to Adrian, uncertain why everyone suddenly seemed so amazed. Adrian offered her a calm smile, though his heart had begun beating faster than ever before. The dreams, the impossible familiarity, the gentle kindness she carried, and now the ancient tree itself seemed to be confirming what he had scarcely dared believe. Destiny had not simply guided Evelyn Ashford into Blackthorn Citadel. It had been leading both of them toward this very moment since long before either of them had been born. The silver leaves continued drifting gently around the ancient Moonkeeper Oak long after the evening breeze had faded, settling across the stone pathway like tiny stars fallen from the night sky. The elderly groundskeeper remained speechless, his weathered hands trembling slightly around the lantern he carried. At last he lifted his eyes toward Adrian with quiet reverence. "My king," he said softly, "the old chronicles speak of this sign. My grandfather used to tell me that the Moonkeeper would awaken only when two souls bound by destiny finally stood together beneath its branches." Evelyn immediately stepped back, embarrassed by the attention. There must be another explanation. she said with gentle humility. Nature often surprises us. The old gardener smiled kindly. Perhaps, my lady. Yet I have watched this tree through every season for half a century. Tonight is unlike any night I have ever known. Adrian did not answer immediately. Instead, he bent down and carefully picked up one of the shimmering leaves resting near Evelyn's feet. The delicate silver surface reflected the moonlight before dissolving into tiny points of light that disappeared in the cool air. His heartbeat echoed with memories that had followed him since childhood. Every dream had ended the same way. A silver leaf would fall into his hand just before he awakened, always leaving him with the feeling that someone was still searching for him beyond the edge of sleep. He looked toward Evelyn with quiet wonder. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "Of course." His voice remained calm, though every word carried years of unanswered questions. "When you were younger, did you ever have recurring dreams?" Evelyn looked surprised by the unexpected question. She lowered her gaze for a moment before answering honestly. "Since I was about 8 years old." Adrian felt the world around him become strangely still. "Would you tell me about them?" She smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "They never made much sense. I dreamed of walking through snow that never felt cold. There was always a castle hidden among dark mountains, although I had never seen this kingdom before. Someone stood waiting beneath a large tree with silver leaves. I could never see his face clearly because I always woke up before reaching him." Adrian closed his eyes for one quiet breath. Those were the very same dreams that had shaped every year of his life. Before he could respond, Evelyn continued with quiet curiosity. "There was one thing I always remembered after waking." "What was that?" Adrian asked gently. She looked directly into his silver eyes. "The feeling that whoever was waiting there had been lonely for a very long time." Those simple words reached deeper than she could possibly know. Adrian had spent years carrying responsibilities that left little room for his own heart. He had accepted loneliness as the price of wearing the crown. Yet somehow a woman he had never met had understood the silent burden hidden behind every dream. Neither of them noticed Lady Margaret approaching from the garden entrance until she stopped a respectful distance away. She smiled as she observed the peaceful scene before speaking softly. "Your Majesty, tomorrow morning the neighboring lords will arrive to witness the formal completion of the peace treaty." Adrian acknowledged her with a slight nod, but his attention returned to Evelyn almost immediately. "Then tomorrow," he said calmly, "everyone will finally understand that Lady Evelyn is not here as payment for a forgotten war." Evelyn looked at him with quiet confusion. "Then why am I here?" Adrian held her gaze beneath the shimmering branches of the Moonkeeper oak, his expression warm with a certainty that had taken a lifetime to discover. "I do not know every answer yet," he admitted honestly. "But I know this. You were never meant to become a sacrifice for someone else's future. Somehow, long before either of us was born, destiny began leading you home. And tonight, for the first time, I believe it has finally finished the journey." Morning sunlight poured through the towering stained glass windows of Blackthorn Citadel, scattering brilliant shades of silver, sapphire, and gold across the marble floor of the great assembly hall. Nobles from every allied territory filled the chamber in formal attire, their conversations carrying quiet anticipation as they gathered to witness the official completion of the peace treaty between Ashford and Blackthorn. Evelyn stood beside Lady Margaret near the front of the hall, wearing the silver gown prepared for her arrival. Although hundreds of eyes rested upon her, she carried herself with calm dignity, refusing to let uncertainty overshadow the quiet confidence she had begun to discover within herself. Across the chamber, Adrian entered wearing the ceremonial black mantle reserved for the Alpha King alone. Every voice immediately fell silent as he approached the royal dais with measured composure. After greeting the assembled lords, he welcomed the visiting delegation from House Ashford. Evelyn's two older brothers stepped forward in richly embroidered cloaks, their expressions carefully controlled as they bowed before the throne. They spoke proudly of sacrifice, duty, and the difficult decision that had preserved peace between the kingdoms. They expected gratitude for their wisdom. Instead, Adrian listened without interruption, his silver eyes revealing nothing until the eldest brother concluded by saying, "We trust that our sister has fulfilled her purpose as the offering required to secure lasting peace." The words lingered heavily throughout the hall. Evelyn lowered her gaze, determined not to let old wounds reopen before so many witnesses. Before anyone else could respond, Adrian slowly rose from his throne. The movement alone commanded the attention of every noble present. His voice remained calm, yet every word carried unmistakable authority. There is one matter that must be corrected before this treaty is sealed. The chamber grew perfectly still. Adrian descended the short staircase leading from the throne and walked directly toward Evelyn. He stopped beside her instead of facing the visiting delegation. Looking first at her and then at the assembled court, he spoke with complete certainty. Lady Evelyn Ashford did not arrive here as payment for a debt, nor as an object exchanged between rival houses. From the moment she crossed our border, she entered this kingdom under my personal protection and my complete respect. Quiet murmurs spread through the hall. Evelyn looked at him in astonishment, scarcely believing the words she was hearing. Adrian continued without raising his voice. No treaty has the authority to diminish the worth of a single honorable life. Peace purchased through humiliation is not peace worthy of preserving. Several elder nobles slowly nodded in agreement. Even the visiting ambassadors exchanged thoughtful glances. Adrian then turned toward Evelyn with a warmth that everyone in the chamber could plainly see. Lady Evelyn has shown kindness to every servant she has met, gratitude for every gesture offered to her, and grace despite carrying burdens she never chose for herself. Those qualities cannot be negotiated or traded. They are treasures no kingdom has the right to claim. Tears shimmered gently in Evelyn's eyes, but she smiled through them, standing taller than she ever had before. Her brothers looked stunned, realizing that the frightened sister they believed they had surrendered had instead been welcomed with honor greater than they had ever imagined. At that very moment, sunlight streamed through the eastern windows and illuminated the silver crest embroidered across Evelyn's gown. An elderly royal historian stepped forward unexpectedly, studying the ancient symbols with growing amazement. He opened a weathered manuscript he carried and quietly compared its faded illustration with the living scene before him. His voice trembled with disbelief as he looked toward Adrian. "Your Majesty, according to the oldest prophecy preserved within the royal archives, when the Silver Lady stands beside the Wolf King beneath the morning light, the long-awaited era of united kingdoms will begin." The ancient prophecy echoed through the great assembly hall long after the royal historian lowered the weathered manuscript in trembling hands. Every noble stood in thoughtful silence as sunlight continued pouring through the eastern windows, bathing Evelyn and Adrian in a soft silver glow that seemed almost unreal. Evelyn looked toward the faded pages with quiet disbelief. She had spent her entire life believing she was little more than an obligation carried by her family, someone whose future could be decided without her voice ever being heard. Yet now strangers looked at her with hope instead of pity. Adrian stepped closer, leaving only a respectful distance between them. His silver eyes reflected warmth that no crown or title could create. "Whether the prophecy is remembered correctly or not," he said calmly for the entire court to hear, "one truth is already beyond question. Lady Evelyn has reminded this kingdom that kindness possesses a strength no sword has ever matched." The hall remained silent before one elder noble slowly placed his hand across his chest in respect. Another followed, then another. Within moments, every member of the royal court stood honoring the young woman who had entered the kingdom, believing she was nothing more than a symbol of surrender. Evelyn felt tears gather once again, but this time they carried no sorrow. They were born from the overwhelming realization that she had finally been seen for who she truly was. Her brothers lowered their heads, unable to meet her eyes. For the first time they understood what they had failed to recognize all those years within their own home. The quiet strength they had dismissed had become the very quality that united two kingdoms without a single threat being spoken. Adrian turned toward the visiting delegation with calm dignity. "The peace between our houses will not endure because of fear. It will endure because we choose respect over resentment and understanding over old divisions." His words settled gently throughout the chamber, and one by one the visiting lords voiced their agreement. The treaty that followed no longer described Evelyn as part of any exchange. Instead, new language declared that both kingdoms would protect the dignity and freedom of every noble guest crossing their shared borders. It was a simple change upon parchment, yet everyone present understood that history had quietly turned a new page. Later that afternoon, Evelyn returned to the Moonkeeper Oak, with Adrian walking beside her beneath clear blue skies. The ancient tree stood peacefully above them, its silver leaves shimmering in the gentle breeze. This time, when Evelyn rested her hand against the old bark, nothing extraordinary happened. No leaves drifted from the branches. No mysterious signs appeared. She smiled softly. Perhaps the tree has already said everything it wished to say. Adrian smiled in return. Perhaps destiny no longer needs to whisper once two people finally choose to listen. They stood together beneath the spreading branches while children laughed somewhere beyond the palace gardens, and distant bells welcomed another peaceful evening across Blackthorn. For the first time in many years, Adrian felt no loneliness waiting beyond tomorrow. For the first time in her life, Evelyn no longer wondered whether she truly belonged somewhere. She had not found her worth because a king had recognized her. She had always possessed it. He had simply been the first person with the wisdom to see it clearly. High above them, sunlight filtered through the silver leaves, scattering gentle patterns across the stone path where their shadows rested side by side. The dreams that had guided them across countless years had quietly fulfilled their purpose, not by changing who they were, but by leading two faithful hearts to the place where they had always been meant to meet, proving that true strength is gentle, true honor protects rather than possesses, and the greatest kingdoms are built not upon fear, but upon compassion, trust, and love that chooses another every single day.